So in this short video, I want to talk for just a little bit about what you see in figure one. So put figure one in front of you from this chapter, and you'll see a 1.0, a 1.1, a 2.0, a 2.1, a 3.0, 3.1, and then a 4.0 on that diagram. So you know exactly which diagram I'm looking at. I want you to understand a little bit what this diagram is about, because what we're really arguing here is that a problem creates a team. Now, a lot of the time, a lot of the ways we think about teams are that we create problems to diagnose and solve problems, but we create these teams. The teams are really a result of the problem and not the team is going out and discovering the problem. And so what generally happens is point one is a problem anticipation. A community forms. I was recently looking at a community in New England on Cape Cod and the historical part of this. And the community forms, it's a loose structure of 20 or 30 farms. And then as they move and they have a center, they begin to cluster, and there are 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 structures together. And then fire becomes a danger. And by the 1800s, they've formed fire brigades because they're anticipating a problem that happens. And then another problem happens, medical problems happen, and they form an anticipated response to that. Shipwrecks happen, and they form a coast watch for that. All of that kind of problem anticipation is really how all highly reliable teams begin, in the anticipation phase, where you sort of think about what the ideal outcome would be if there's a problem, and then how you might best respond to that. And so every highly reliable team is formed through regulation and membership and qualification in this first phase of problem anticipation. In search and rescue, they say, in my case, we live in Utah County. We have lots of mountains with lots of cliffs and lots of dangerous places and lots of dangerous trails. And we anticipate that people will get in trouble. So we have to have people with mountain rescue capability in order to appropriately respond in that situation. And they also have to have a certain amount of medical capacity. And they also need to be able to do this and be able to do that. And so it's in that problem anticipation phase that we begin. Now, you'll notice that in the video that you saw earlier in the year, the Search and Rescue KUED documentary, there was discussion of the Nutty Putty Cave incident, and that was a situation that was not fully anticipated. And so you can see what happens when you don't fully or anticipate well a problem. So what happens is you anticipate a problem and then you prepare a team. 1.1 is the reaction to that. You prepare paramedics, you prepare fire people, you prepare police people, search and rescue people. If you're on a coastline somewhere in England or New England, you prepare a rescue lifeboat. Then the second thing you do, point 1 or point 20. Okay, so that second step is that there's an incident of some kind. And you hope that that incident aligns with what you anticipated, and most of the time it does. It doesn't always do that because we're dealing with complex problems, but most of the time your responders will say, yeah, they anticipated that. They got trained us to respond to that. We know that we're going to a heart attack. We know that we're going to a house fire. We know we're going to a cliff rescue. We know what type of problem, and we're ready for it. And so that's the incident, and it's described. And so 2.1 there is the creation of the team around that incident, because you don't need a canine person like me. You don't need a canine person to respond to a mountain rescue unless you have I have some mountain rescue skills, and I usually respond to those, but I'm not the needed person in that. There are some people who are much more needed, and they don't respond to a canine search or the search for a lost person. So you form your team, you have all these qualified people, and then you have the incident, and you take the people you need into that incident, and that's really 2.1. And then that group of people, remember, it's a complex problem, it's always churning, they reform or reshape the problem and hand it off. So you notice I'm saying that they don't necessarily solve the problem, but they give the problem a new face and hand it off. Just over this last weekend, was in a very difficult search, a 3-day search for a lost man above altitude, way up high in the mountains of Utah County. And on day 4, we found his body. Day 3, I'm sorry, we found his body. And so is that the resolution? Is that the resolution of that problem? Is it over? Not by any stretch of the imagination. Grieving parents, 2 grieving brothers, a grieving mother, 2 grieving children, a grieving ex-wife, grieving friends. There are now new problems, a new face to that problem. Even though he will be grieved and laid to rest, the problem has and will re-emerge in other forms. Problems don't get solved like that. They get passed on and reshaped and a different face put on them, but they're complex problems. And so that is what highly reliable teams do, is they put a new face on a problem. They don't solve the problem. They put a new face on it and hand it off to the emergency room, who hands it off to the resident doctors, who hands it off to the operating room, who hands it off to the physical therapist, who hands it off to the other therapist, who hands it off. It just goes on and on that way. Finally, once you do that handoff, you do an assessment of your team. I've talked about the after-action review a fair amount, and where in the after-action review, we stand in a circle and we watch and talk about what happened and what we could do better, and what each person's role was in that particular incident. And that's another way to consider, to learn, to fuel that learning. And then you go back into the recycle mode. You just flip over and you go back and start over. And sometimes you start over and do the exact same thing you just did. At least one day this last summer, I started at 5 o'clock in the morning, and the 5 o'clock call we responded to, and on our way there about 6:30 in the morning, it got called off, and so we didn't have anything to respond to really. So we drove back, got in the house, settled down, got almost to sleep, and then there was another call. And that was up another canyon, and that turned into be pretty much an all-day thing. And then on the way home from that, we got yet another call that took us till 11 o'clock at night. So these things are really ongoing and demanding, and you have to be able to learn from what you just did and then go on to the next situation very, very quickly. That's what that diagram is about, and that's why I've attached this video to the diagram, because I want you to see the sort of ongoing nature of where teams live. There's that problem anticipation that then forms a pool of people that you draw on, so that when you have an incident, you can form a team, deal with the incident, have your mission, hand off the problem, and go back and reset. Thanks.